You make
Dr.
all
Ford
these.
would laugh at you. You don't think Dr. Ford knows that? You don't think Dr. Ford's read those
But
things?
you're the one
Yeah.
saying Ellen White didn't claim to see the investigative judgment and vision, but it's complete bogus.
I didn't say that. I said it's not a fundamental doctrine. It's not a pillar in the three angels' messages. That's what I said.
But she claimed God showed it to her in vision.
Fine. Maybe she thought he did. Maybe he did. That's not for me to tell. No. That's
she
not for
thought
me to
he
know.
showed her a lot of things that he didn't show her. That's my point.
Well, that's the way it goes. You don't get a perfect prophet. You don't get a prophet that's going to tell you the lottery numbers. That was her thing. That was her theme. That was her. So if you're into the second coming, then you should be into Ellen White.
This is for Tom, but I also want Steve to comment on it. How does this Ellen White defender, they're referring to you, Tom, know that what he is reading is actually the words of Ellen G. White? She sounded intelligent because of her literary borrowing. Very little of her writings were her own. So, Tom, you first, and then I'm interested in Steve's thoughts on the literary borrowing.
Well, first of all, this is a myth that most of her writings are borrowed and all that. That's just a complete myth. The Coney Barrenhausen story, which Steve in his book says in at least 3 places is true, lawsuit, pull the book off the shelves, all that kind of stuff. I have documented, and it's not coming up now, but it come in the other parts. It's a complete myth, complete nonsense. It never happened at any time.
A.G. Daniels refers to it in the 1919 minutes.
I know he does, and his 30-year memory is nothing more than a memory.
All right.
I will prove and can prove, and it's already been written. Steve, you just haven't seen it. So before you laugh, wait till you read it, and then everybody can read it. So this thing about plagiarism is just it was started by Kellogg. That's where it came from.
What about the 8-year study with Fred Veltman?
Absolutely.
Fred Veltman's fine. I mean, he didn't come. People have misquoted Fred Veltman.
But you've read the is it 2,000 page summary of that?
Yes, I've read it, and he's being misquoted. He says that.
But it's his words, though. I'm talking about his report that he released after the 8-year study.
People are quoting his report and saying he came out and said she did all this copying. He didn't say that, and that's not what happened. But again, we will prove all this stuff. But I'm just telling you, the Coney Barrenhausen story is a complete and utter fraud. And in fact, if you go to, I forget what page on there's a chart in there, Peter, that follows what everybody says about the Coney Barrenhausen, who started it, who added to it. You know what happened? I'll tell you quickly. When Canwright wrote his first book, Seventh-day Adventism Renounced, in 1888, in that book, he says she plagiarized, blah, blah, blah. Not Coney Barrenhausen. He's talking about The Great Controversy, Volume 4, 1884. Volume 4. He never once in any of his 14 editions of Seventh-day Adventism Renounced says a word about the Coney Barrenhausen Life of Paul story. It's never there. That's not where it comes from. It comes in 1907 from Kellogg and Stewart. And then when Canwright writes his 1919 book against Ellen White, he puts a whole chapter in there of the Coney Barrenhausen thing.
But what about when you actually read her work and the Coney Bear work? Even the headings are exactly the same.
Well, there's very little copying going from Coney Barrenhausen to Life of Paul. Very little, but that's not the story. The story is she was sued. The story is she pulled the book off the shelf because she was a bad girl. None of that happened. It's a complete made-up story.
But if none of that happened, when you do read the two, I've read both of the books together, and it's hard to know which one you're reading.
Well, that's why people said what they said.
How would you explain that?
Coney Barrenhausen, Peter, is not a theological work. It's about landscape, topography, descriptions of the first century. It has nothing to do with doctrine. It's a non-sectarian book, to quote the Adventists. So she used a lot of it, and here's what really happened.
Wouldn't that be unethical?
Pardon?
Wouldn't that be unethical, though, to
Well, back in that day, when you
Morally.
read the report, you'll see it's not unethical. Back then, that's what they did. People can say, "Oh, that's not true." It is true. Just read what I wrote. And here's what happened though. W.C. White, who was only 21 years old, his father had died in 1881, and now he had to take over his mother, being the manager for his mother. He overlooked putting in a preface in that book, which would have talked about we didn't use quotations, blah blah blah. He forgot to do it. He was only 21 years old. So what happens when you have the Harrisburg debates, which I will detail? We found about 13 Harrisburg articles. Steve, you quote one. You missed about 13 of them. And what Canwright is doing there, he's saying it's 50%. He's saying all this stuff. And when the Adventists found out what Canwright was doing, they put the preface in the edition of the 1888 Great Controversy, which deals with quotations and what was left out and why Ellen White doesn't do quotations. Had he put that in the front of the Paul's book, that would have been, Canwright wouldn't have had much to say about it. He failed to put that in there. But in the 1888 edition of the Great Controversy, read the author's preface, 4 or 5 pages, where she is responding back to Canwright and saying, here's how this works. Here's how spiritual gifts work. Here's how my quotations work, blah, blah, blah. So that's the problem with that book. W.C. White forgot to put in the preface that says, look, we don't use quotations, blah, blah, blah. We're doing it this way. Or we should have put some in and done it. They just didn't do it. They didn't do it right. But that's got nothing to do with the story. There was no people saying, oh, you copied too much. There was no lawsuit. There was no demand letter. There was no pulling the book off. It's a complete made up story. And Canwright knew it. The reason he didn't put it in his Seventh Day Adventist Renounced is because he would be sued for slander. That's why. After Ellen White died in 1915, he puts it in his 1919 book. A whole chapter making it look like this Coney Barron housing thing is just an unbelievable, horrible thing that she did. It's a complete fraud and phony.
Like what I'd heard is that they had threatened her. They didn't sue her, but they threatened her with a lawsuit if she didn't take it off the shelves. So, Tom, just let Steve explain if he's uncovered actual evidence that is true.
Yeah, that was the threat. It wasn't an actual lawsuit or any kind of conviction or anything like that.
Have you found that in writing somewhere?
Yes, and Daniels himself talks about this, like you say, Daniels was a friend of Ellen White. He had no reason to be attacking her. He's very candid about the problem with that book. And you yourself said you've read both copies, and it's obvious that, to try to justify plagiarism is a pretty sad thing. And, even if
it's not plagiarism, it's not. It's just, you just say you're calling it that, but it's not that.
That's what you want to
argue.
argue.
Says it's that way. It's not that way.
But Steve, are you saying there's actual written evidence of them writing that to her?
Many legal scholars who say she was absolutely guilty of plagiarism.
Oh, that's not true. That's not true.
It's 100%.
Legal scholars I read say she wasn't.
Back to Steve. Is there an actual document uncovered where they've written to her saying cease and desist?
I haven't seen it. If it exists,
because it doesn't exist. It's made up. I've got letters.
Daniels confirms it. What would Daniels have against?
Forget Daniels. Daniels is talking about memory 30 years ago. Is there any proof? And the fact of the matter is, I've got 2 letters from the Coney Barron Howell publisher saying it never happened. It never happened. The publisher saying that.
100 years later, or what?
Making this stuff up. It's ridiculous.
But if you're saying A.G. Daniels is relying on 30 years of memory, they're relying on over 100 years memory. Why would you trust them more?
Facts. We need facts. So you don't write a book, Steve, and say she was guilty of lawsuits. She was guilty of all that, and they don't. And it's not that you have no proof.
Now sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I have one of the most documented books you're going to read. So, people can read.
Give me a break.
Make up their own mind. I don't care what you think.
Read my sources and make up your own mind. That's
you have your own agenda, so I'm not.
I have my agenda to tell the truth. That's right. That's my agenda.
Not the truth.
Now we're looking forward to your book coming out, Tom. Make sure you do publish it so that we can actually buy it and we're going to have a part 2, I think, one day where your book's out and Steve's had a bit of a read. Here's one for Steve. Excuse me. Can Steve comment on Ellen G. White having visions from God about Christ's return in 1847, 1852? I think it was 1851, wasn't it? And on 2 other occasions. What are the sources of that? To me, and I've said this to you before, Steve, Adventism, if Christ had come back 7 years after 1844, that's 1851, isn't it? The Adventism would have been proved absolutely perfectly true and accurate. It's because to me that not coming true is a big one for me, because it suddenly meant that Adventists had to kind of spend the rest of their existence trying to fit that round peg into a square hole. But share us your thoughts on that. Vision from God about the return.
There's so much here that it's hard to be concise. But she starts out in her when she's 17 years old with her first vision, claiming that God gave her the day and hour of his second coming right in that first vision, which is a total lie. And then her best friend, Lucinda Burdick, who's traveling with her, leaves her and says, this woman is constantly claiming God showing her stuff about his return that never came true, again and again and again. Then of course you have Bates coming up with the 7-year theory, and she embraces that and says there's only 3 months left, again, based on a vision. In 1856, she claims she sees a vision where people will be translated in that room. They all die, and she has no answer for it. It's just one thing after the next. She's claiming it's too late to get married.
But then she gets married. She gets married.
Right, and then she gets married.
So why do you say you act like she's don't get married? She got married. So she's changing, she's growing, she's learning. This is
after James died. Many, many, many years later.
You think the Adventists went around teaching people not to get married?
If people would have taken her seriously, we wouldn't have a human race left. She's just claiming so much stuff from God that's complete nonsense that you have to really be naive to believe God's showing her all this stuff.
How did she pull this off? How could such an awful person develop a global religious empire? It's mind-boggling that you can be
very
so
easily.
Stupid
very easily. It's a very isolated subculture.
Go ahead, you do it. Go ahead. You go.
I don't want to do it. I don't want to be a cult leader.
Here's someone that's written, she's not the first to build up an empire and still be a big-time fraud. We choose and filter through the word of God. She got the word wrong on many, many occasions with a list of E.G. White contradictions that disqualify her.
Contradictions don't make you a fraud. That's the thing here. Contradictions don't nullify the Spirit of God.
Claiming what she claimed makes her a fraud.
No, you're misreading her claims. You're embellishing them. You're taking them out of context.
They're her exact quotes. I mean,
exact quote. Yeah, she had an exact quote too. We shouldn't get married because the second coming is going to happen. Well, she was 19 years old when she said that or whatever. She realized that wasn't right and she got married. So don't go around to, oh, she's so stupid. She said that. She was a young.
She did the same thing.
You're going to get stuff wrong. That doesn't mean she's a fraud.
Now, thing in the 1880s after James died, claiming God showed her this in vision. Come on. I mean,
you have to read what she says in context. If it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Doesn't mean she's a fraud.
Yeah,
you can't produce all the fruit she has and be a fraud.
Here's one for Tom. Do you have to be an Adventist to be saved, Tom?
Absolutely not. I mean, whoever heard of such a thing? God's not an Adventist. Jesus is not an Adventist. So, no, not at all. But you do have to understand the gospel. That's more difficult than understanding Adventism.
Someone else has said you can't excuse everything she said and did. She was a hypocrite about her own health message. But I think, Tom, you're saying that even hypocrites can have inspirational
Of course. I mean,
tendencies.
again, you got to get off of this perfection. Okay, we'll listen to her. Makes a mistake, she's awful. It's just not how life works. She lived a long time. What she wrote and said and when she was 17 is going to be different than when she's 27, and then when she's 37 and 47 and 57 and 67 and 77. You can't take these quotes out of context and then slap her with them and say, what kind of idiot woman are you? People grow, they learn.
This is Claire from YouTube. The investigative judgment and Ellen White stand and fall together. Pretty sure she said something like that herself. Thoughts,
Absolutely
Tom?
not.
Tom first.
I mean, the right wing of Adventism has claimed that for her, but that is not true. And in fact, investigative judgment is not even a pillar in the three angels' messages. And more specifically, the hour of his judgment has come in Revelation 14:7 is only a reference to the second coming. It never was a reference to the investigative judgment. And when the Tacoma Park apologists started teaching that was the end of Adventism. You know, when you change the three angels' messages in such a dramatic way, you ruin it. So everybody thinks the investigative judgment is in the first angel's message and that Ellen White said you can't change it, but it never was. Only the second coming. The hour of judgment has come was something Miller said about the second coming. You can't go back and change that and insert the investigative judgment there. But that's what has happened, and it's destroyed Adventism.
Tom, when I interviewed you last time, and I think it was me, or we may have both agreed that there are a lot of people that agree with you in this kind of little subsidiary form of Adventism. Have you found in the last couple of years a growing movement that are gathering together in online groups or face-to-face that agree with you and are kind of building up a bit of a community?
You know, I haven't had an active website for a number of years. I can tell you this, a lot of people in Adventism are not happy with it. They're not as unhappy as Steve, but they're, you know, Ellen White's credibility right now is at, I don't know if it's zero, but it's pretty close to it. It's a catastrophe what's happening. And the problem with Ellen White is if you defame her and slander her and don't pay attention to her, you'll never get anything. You'll never learn any eschatology. You'll never improve Adventism because she is a founder. And as a founder, she knows how this thing was put together and what's important and what's not. And to her, the three angels' messages is what it was all about. And she never changed that. So, and she said, look, you're going to learn new stuff. You're going to unlearn stuff. Whatever we've said in the past, it doesn't matter. It matters what is truth and what the Bible teaches, blah, blah, blah. And she did say, I think this is what the lady's talking about, that we can never remove the pillars and they have to stand and all that. But then people misunderstand the pillars. They think the investigative judgment is a pillar in the first angel's message. That's what everybody ended up saying in the 70s. Well, it never was in the first angel's message, and it's not a pillar. And investigative judgment is a false, wrong, incorrect, diversionary doctrine. And unless it gets removed and repudiated, Adventism cannot focus on the second coming, the time of trouble, the stuff they need to be paying attention to.
Someone has written Adventism is a false gospel. What truth needs to be uncovered or restored? You can't fix a mistake by living in it. Do you think that by staying within the Adventist Church, Tom, you can bring about this kind of change and new awareness, a waking up that needs to?
Well, I don't know. I don't go to church. I don't pay tithe. Tithe is a false doctrine. I would never do it. I've grown out of that. So I don't go to church. I cannot support it because they teach so many absolutely horrible doctrines, including the investigative judgment. There's no such doctrine, and they don't teach the gospel correctly. So, Dr. Ford does. I mean, if it wasn't for Dr. Ford, I think I probably would have given up altogether on Adventism. But he is such a positive, gospel-oriented person, and he thought Adventism was raised up by God. He thought Ellen White was legitimate, and I'll document that in the next section of the book. So Stephen, you're arguing against me about Ellen White. You're arguing against Dr. Ford. Des Ford loves Ellen White, supports Ellen White, defends Ellen White, knows how to articulate her without going down these rabbit holes of oh, she became an alcoholic and she did this when she was 17 and she tripped over something. You know, that's nonsense. So I support Dr. Ford's view of Ellen White 100%, as well as his view about the three angels' messages and Adventism. There's a lot of good in Adventism. The fact that they have an incorrect gospel and incorrect judgment is horrible. They need to get the right gospel, the correct judgment, which is the second coming, and move this thing forward to the fourth angel's message.
Yeah,
where,
I mean,
where you will get correct doctrines about the Sabbath and everything else, hopefully.
Steve, any thoughts?
Ford certainly didn't agree with Ellen White on a lot of her eschatology, and especially the investigative judgment.
Of
What
course
she
not,
says,
but he believed in her.
What she says in Spiritual Gifts 1, page 162, 197, 198, she completely claims to confirm the investigative judgment through vision. She does the same thing in the Spirit of Prophecy, volume 4, page 266. You make
Dr.
all
Ford
these
would laugh at you. You don't think Dr. Ford knows that? You don't think Dr. Ford's read those things?
But you're the one saying Ellen White didn't claim to see the investigative judgment in vision, but it's complete bogus.
I didn't say that. I said it's not a fundamental doctrine. It's not a pillar in the three angels' messages. That's what I said.
But she claimed God showed it to her in vision.
Fine. Maybe she thought he did. Maybe he did. That's not for me to tell. No. That's
she thought he showed her a lot of things that he didn't show her. That's my point.
Well, that's the way it goes. You know, you don't get a perfect prophet. You don't get a prophet that's going to tell you the lottery numbers. You know, you get what you get. And we're lucky we got what we got, because you wouldn't have Seventh-day Adventism without Ellen White. You would not have.
You seem to think eschatology is Adventism saving grace. It's one of the worst things about Adventism.
Well, it's the point of Adventism. It's the point of Adventism.
It's about legalism, perfectionism, the time of trouble, Sunday laws, all of
it doesn't have to be legalism. It doesn't have to be legalism. You mean the people, if you think the second coming is close, you mean you're a legalist? That can't be true.
The reason Adventists are so messed up is Ellen White's visions. That's the reason.
No, they're so messed up. Well, how is the rest of the world messed up? Is it because of Ellen White? Are the Baptists messed up because of Ellen White? Are the Catholics messed up because of Ellen White? Is the world messed up because of Ellen White? You blame her for everything. It's absurd.
Now let's keep moving on. Someone else just gave another plug for Test the Prophet. Have you seen that website, Tom? It's a really good one. What about you, Steve?
Yes,
I've seen something there where a guy with a really important voice is going over the Coney Barron housing thing and just repeating all these myths that are out there.